that's the worst book I ever read, I don't think I got out of this Vale of Tears unscathed.
Hello! It is getting very close to the end of the year. I've been doing some reflecting back on the books that I read throughout this year. I'm currently at 116 books, and I think we are looking pretty good for rounding out. My reading goal this year was pretty ambitious. It was 120 books, like 10 books a month on average, and not all of them were winners. So I will do a favorite books of the year. I want to make sure that I include everything that I read, so I will probably do that a little later. But I thought it could be really fun to do my least favorite books of this year. I tend to really like the books that I read. I know my taste pretty well. I know what I'm looking for. And sometimes I really strike out, and that can be fun anyway. Like, you know, I'm not a professional hater, but I'll do it part-time. So I wanted to chat through, there were 7 books this year, some of which may be a little bit controversial, that were not my favorite. So we can jump right in. The first book that I wanted to talk about was The Crown of Midnight, and kind of more expansively, the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. So I know I'm starting off a little spicy. A lot of people love these books. I've read all of ACOTAR. I have read the Crescent City series, and I have liked them a good bit, clearly enough to read thousands of pages. They are not the best quality books I have read, but they're really fun, and I obviously had a good time with them. I actually, hot take, love Crescent City. I know some people think it's the worst books they've ever read, and I disagree. I think it's like watching reality TV. I have a really good time with them. I feel like she does a good job of like having a lot of characters that have interesting things going on in her other series and building good romances in those series. So those are my credentials. I am not just an unmitigated Sarah J. Maas hater. I thought I was gonna like these because these are what everybody says are like the best of her books and the best fantasy that she's written. And so I read Throne of Glass last year, and it felt very meh to me. But that's okay because, as we all know, Sarah J. Maas gets one terrible book out of her system before she gets into the rest of the series. Or at least that's been my experience with ACOTAR. So I gave her that one as like a one-off. And then I read Crown of Midnight, and I was like, okay, this series is not for me. To back up, the Throne of Glass series, for those who don't know, centers Selena Sardathian. She is an assassin and a rebel. She was involved in some sort of vague rebellion against the monarchy of her country. And she was condemned to the salt mines. She's like, when we meet her, she's been in prison for over a year. She's been horribly mistreated. She's very malnourished. But she is still set up as this incredibly powerful spy and assassin. And she is plucked out of the salt mines by, I believe, the crown prince and put into a competition to become the king's assassin. And so the first book follows, there's like some different magical elements that are going on. She has a connection to kind of a past powerful entity in the kingdom that she connects with in the castle. What I will say about that first book is that it is so forgettable that I literally am forgetting what happened in that book. There's like kind of a love triangle or like romantic tension with both the crown prince and the captain of the guard, who doesn't trust Selena. He doesn't trust Selena because she very recently was a rebel against this kingdom and is now competing to work for the king. And he is so right for that. I don't understand why that isn't more of a question or more of a consideration in these books. She does kind of work against the king. Like, she doesn't love the king, but at the same time, I don't understand why anybody would ever think that she would have turned her like, it doesn't make sense at all to think that she would be this very powerful tool for this king that she was willing to die to usurp. Weird. She also, and like, listen, you can't have a protagonist be totally perfect, but I will say she is built up to be like this incredible fighter and assassin and badass, and like she gets her ass handed to her continually throughout these books. She never really seems to know what's going on. She's like, oh, and then the magic led me in this direction, and the magic led me in this direction. Like, no deductions are ever happening. The romance, which I feel helps SJM get through some of her more like plotting plots, was not there in the first two books of this series. I just did not care. And that made it very difficult to keep going. And I don't think, I mean, we've seen in others of SJM's books that political intrigue is not her number one specialty. And I feel like in these books, that's supposed to be the selling point. So I gave her 2 tries. She struck out. These were like a solid 2-3 star. These were not the worst books that I've read, but I wanted to get this out of the way because everybody loves to sing the praises of Throne of Glass, and for me, meh. Next, and along kind of similar lines, I have the second book in another romantasy type series. So Danielle L. Jensen, I had read before for her Saga of the Unfated series, which is kind of a Norse mythology focused romantasy series. That one's okay. I've read the first 2 books. I will probably read the third. It was like fine. But I had heard somebody say that the Bridge Kingdom, which is a lesser known earlier series of hers, has a lot more of a fascinating plot to it, like kind of unusual. And so I gave it a try. And the Bridge Kingdom, the first book, I actually loved, and I read in like 2 days, and I gave maybe a 4 or 5 star. It was really good. The premise of that book is that there are kind of disparate kingdoms in this fantasy world, and there is a very tempestuous sea in the middle of them that is filled with like, you know, it's a little comical. It's filled with these like man-eating sharks, and it has all these crazy storms. Like, it is impassable. And there's something called the Bridge Kingdom, which has like a chain of islands that go across most of this sea, and they have built this huge infrastructural bridge that is the safest shipping route or like mercantile route for the entire world. And so everybody has to rely on this kingdom. Everybody has to pay these inordinately high taxes on the shipping across this bridge. This kingdom doesn't really produce anything. The islands are not like super hospitable. And so like all that they are doing is kind of taking value out of this bridge and providing the bridge to other kingdoms. So our protagonist, Lara, grows up. She's a princess of her kingdom. She is removed from her subjects and from her castle and from the political scene as a very young child because the Bridge Kingdom has 2 children at this point, twin children, a daughter and a son, a prince and a princess. And as a way for the Bridge Kingdom to like improve its relationships with other countries and stop everybody from trying to take over their bridge all the time, they have signed a treaty that agrees that Arin, the crown prince, will marry somebody from Lara's kingdom, and his twin sister will marry somebody from a different kingdom so that they can set up better relationships. So the second that this treaty is signed, Lara's father takes all of the daughters out of his like harem of women and children and moves them to this like compound in the desert to train them all to be assassins. There's a heavy assassin theme. I like the idea of an assassin. Whoever is the strongest among them will be the one to marry Prince Arin. They are then responsible for like spying on the Bridge Kingdom from within that marriage, finding out and passing along as much information as they can, and then taking it down from the inside. So Lara feels that she is up to this task. The book starts explosively. It's not groundbreaking, but it was really interesting. There's kind of a sweet relationship that develops between herself and Arin. I read it very quickly. I liked it a lot. And one of the things I really liked about it and was excited to explore in the second one, the Traitor Queen, was that Danielle L. Jensen set up a unique dynamic where like, I know that the idea in romance is to create plot machinations that keep your 2 characters apart as long as possible to keep that tension. I think a lot of people have forgotten that in modern day romance writing, but I thought that this plot in particular had a great vehicle to keep these 2 apart. So good, without giving too much away, but so good that I genuinely thought she was going to do something really interesting and not have the 2 of them end up together, because it was not possible within the plot for both of them to stay true to their character, stay true to their values and what they liked about each other, and to be together. So I thought that was really interesting. It was like complex. It kept me turning the pages because I wanted to see this ending of, you know, ultimately, like, we're just gonna have to do something totally new here where like, or Shakespearean at least, where the 2 of them don't end up together and it's almost like a romance tragedy. I thought that was gonna be so cool. Instead, she went the very conventional route of the romance where they have to have a happily ever after. The two of them have to be together. Spoiler alert. And the way that she got there was this shark ex machina BS. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. What I thought was masterful writing to like create this situation that was going to result in a very interesting romance ending was in fact Danielle L. Jensen writing herself into a corner where she couldn't get what she wanted without doing something ridiculous. So she did something ridiculous. It was really frustrating. I felt like there had been so much buildup to like the world's worst payoff. Like it just was implausible and stupid. So I ended up giving that one 2 stars, and like I hold against it that I thought it was going to be so interesting. But I still recommend, weirdly enough, like if you read The Bridge Kingdom, I recommend that you read The Bridge Kingdom and then pretend that it ends there, because that's the most interesting way for it to kind of end, I think. The next disappointing book was The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. I don't know if Laurie Gilmore is actually named that, like if it says that on her birth certificate, or if it's kind of a play on Lorelai Gilmore, because this small town, it's like a series of books about the same small town. They are all very vibes based, and I really do feel like it is written for the Gilmore girlies. Like it is very fall la la la's sort of books, and so I feel like that has to be a wink and a nod name and a pseudonym, but who knows? Either way, the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore I picked up not because I thought it was going to be a great book, but because it was October and I wanted those like Cinnamon Bun Bookstore vibes. And the front cover, which I'll put over here, had like exactly what I thought I was going to get, was like these golden tones and the leaves falling, and like I knew it was going to be a romance. Great, cute. This story follows Hazel Kelly, who works at the town's bookstore, and she is like falling in love with this fisherman named Noah. Pretty much from the jump, I should have known that I was not going to get the vibes that I wanted. The story starts and takes place in the summer, regardless of the title and regardless of the cover. Hazel is turning 30 in like, I want to say September or October, like early fall. And so we start months before that, and before she turns 30, she wants to like turn her quiet little life upside down, and she wants to like go on all these little adventures, and Noah, who's obviously got a huge crush on her, decides to like help her on her little quest. But they are all summer events. Like they go, I don't remember, they go like on a boat and they go to the beach, and like I want to say they go to like a fair of some kind. Like they are all summer activities, and the two of them are just like la-la-laing throughout the summer. When you have a book where the entire thing you're selling is the feeling of fall, and like that's all that you can promise people, to then set it during the summer was insane to me. I don't know why on earth I kept reading it from that point, but I kept thinking that it was going to like get to that vibe, because I thought we understood that like I didn't pay for this, I got it from the library, but ostensibly if I had paid $12 or whatever, what I was purchasing from this book obviously was like cozy bookstore cinnamon vibes. And instead it was a very meh whatever romance that took place throughout the summer. So I don't know if the other books are like this. They are all kind of pitching a season. There's like a Christmas one, there's like another fall one, whatever. But I don't know if they're all selling themselves as one thing and then kind of like sneaking in a totally different vibe. But if so, terrible model. This was like a 1 star because I knew the writing was going to be bad and I was only there for one thing. And she refused to give it to me. She was withholding. It was weird. So yeah, that's the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore. Can't recommend. This next book, a friend pressured me to read, and I should have known because she loves to have me read. When it's a good book, she'll tell me the whole plot. But when it's a really bad book, she has a history of being like, you have to read this. Like, you have to read it for yourself. So I should have known this one was going to be really bad. But it's The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I'm not sure. Our protagonist, Casey Fletcher, is kind of hitting rock bottom. She's got a bit of an alcohol problem. Her husband, Len, passed away recently, and like she's obviously kind of grieving and reeling from that event. and she is staying at her family's like lake house. And she's really bored, she's lonely out there, she doesn't have a lot going on. She starts watching the couple across the lake, Tom and Catherine. And she just becomes kind of interested in their lives. Catherine was once a model, she's gorgeous, and Casey is kind of watching her as in like an anthropological interest sort of way, it seems. But one morning, Casey is out on the lake on her boat and she rescues Catherine from drowning. They kind of kick off an actual relationship from there where they're friends. She gets to know Tom and Catherine a little bit better, and she starts to realize that maybe there's something going on in this relationship. So she's kind of examining that. And then there's also Catherine disappears, and there have been other disappearances around the lake. So it's kind of like a conventional thriller for most of it. You're like following Casey as she like investigates these disappearances and is looking for her friend, and she's like very skeptical of Tom, whatever. Then we come to a supernatural twist that was never advertised. The interesting thing about a thriller is trying to figure it out, right? And so like to have this supernatural element happen literally in the last like 30 pages of the book, it's revealed, was really frustrating. And it was also just a terrible, terrible twist. It got very confusing. It got very stupid. It was like possession based, and Len was like, the spirit of Len was in the lake, and then it possessed Catherine when Catherine almost drowned. Like, the reason that I feel very comfortable spoiling this book is that I'm begging you not to read it. It was so bad and dumb. And the most frustrating thing was that it was like a totally boring thriller up until those last 30 pages, and then it took a turn for like so crazy. I think the books that like are poorly written but give me what I was expecting, I can forgive a lot better than books that are like decently written but refuse to give the reader what they signed on for. So that's The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. The next book was Loch and Key by Lana Ferguson. This is a kind of silly little supernatural romance that takes place in Scotland. Our male protagonist turns into the Loch Ness Monster at night. Nessie is typically portrayed as a woman, but in this case, he is a strapping Scottish lad. For me, supernatural romance, as it turns out, is not my favorite genre. And I think I could be forgiven for seeing this on the shelf at Target and seeing these like cutie little pink rain boots and like the little pop of the tail moment on the front cover, and thinking that this was going to be more cute than it was. And some of the scenes were frankly shocking, and I'll never get them out of my head. But I won't hold that against it, because I do think some people, like, supernatural romance is a genre, and I was not super familiar with its game, but some people are, and like knew exactly what they were getting into with that book, and I'm sure it delivered. So I won't hold that against it. What I will hold against it is the romance element, because the two of these characters, like the plot itself was so frustrating. Our protagonist's name is Kiana. She has come to Scotland after her father passed away, because her mom was like never really in the picture. She died when Kiana was very young, and her father was from Scotland, and there was some sort of falling out with his family, so she was never like connected with them. She is a deeply incurious person. So like, she never even bothered to ask her father anything about his family, anything about this feud. She doesn't know anything about her life or her family, not because her father forbade her from asking, not because like he wouldn't have talked about it, but because it seemed to make him sad. I just find it shocking that she would be like a 30-year-old woman who knew nothing about her own family or history, even though she says that she's very lonely and, that her dad was really the only thing that she had and like all this kind of stuff. She refused to ask a single question of him before he died, and so she shows up like this newborn baby with no knowledge. And not only about her family, she seems to have like dropped out of outer space onto Scottish soil, and she doesn't know anything. I get that people like a naive female character in a romance, and like it's a good foil for the male character. I don't personally love that trope, but even for this, it seemed to be taking it like pretty far. She was asking questions about things, and I was like, if you've existed for any period of time, You should probably know this, even if you haven't existed in Scotland. And she, again, like, had no backstory whatsoever. He kind of had friends and family that we interacted with or like learned about because it was his home turf. And so like to flesh out the world that they were currently living in, his family and his friends were like in the picture a bit. She had no friends. There's like vague allusions to a romantic past, but nobody with a name or nobody of any significance. It seems like she could literally pick up her life from the minute that her dad died and move it across a continent, and there would be no repercussions. She had no job, she had no expertise. Like, that was really frustrating. And then the other thing that really got to me is that the plot of this was that they were kind of looking into there's like some overlap in their family histories, which is also a little weird between romantic protagonists. Like, it was far enough back that you weren't like worried that it was incest, but it did seem like their ancestors had been like married to one another. And produced children. So, Ireland and Scotland, I guess, are never losing those allegations. And, you know, my family tree is also all the way back in Ireland, so I'm sure that maybe some branches cross at a certain point, but it was a weird thing to include in a romance novel. But regardless, they're looking into this family history because there was like some sort of falling out or frustration in their past family. And as they find it out, like, this is like their greats, like very far back. They are taking this so personally. There is so much angst and like existential dread, and like they can't be together because their great whatever was a bad person. Wasn't everybody's great whatever a bad person? Like, a lot of them owned slaves. I don't know. I mean, obviously this is something you have to grapple with a little bit, but the soul searching and the like modern day anguish that this caused was ludicrous. So on top of not really liking the like spice in this book at all, oh my God. The actual romance that we were getting was really bizarre and seemed kind of disconnected from reality. This was a 1-star, and I actually DNF'd like 80% of the way through because it was not getting better. The next one is One of Us is Dead, and I'm gonna speed through this one because the last one is the one I'm dying to talk about. One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose, I think came onto a lot of people's like radar this year. It reminded me, the premise is that it takes place primarily in a hair salon in like a wealthy neighborhood of Georgia, and it follows these like housewives and their lives. And it kind of reminded me, I thought it was gonna be like, if anybody ever read like the Click series, as like middle schoolers, like trashy, gossipy relationships. So like wealthy people behaving badly is like a whole genre of TV and film or whatever. And I thought it was gonna be like fun. This was so, on a sentence level, so poorly written that sometimes I had to like take a break and like reread something a couple times to make sure that I wasn't missing something. It seemed like it had been written like on an iPhone or something. Like somebody did not have the time or the space to like actually write prose. So that was really weird. And then the characters, listen, like, I'm not expecting them to be saints, and actually I'm here for them to behave badly, but like, one of them was so cartoonishly evil that she was like rubbing her little hands together about sex trafficking. Like, it was a Ghislaine Maxwell type of lady. So like insane, out of this world evil, hard to believe. And then the rest of them similarly had like no depth and no complexity, no nuance. There weren't really any circumstances that were like forcing their hand, or, you know, like, usually there's something interesting, but not in this case. This one was a 1-star. I can't recommend it. It's not fun to read, which is what I thought it was going to be.
Okay, the battery on my camera ran out, which is a tragedy, but I could not leave this conversation without talking about my #1 absolute least favorite book, on-site book from 2025, which was All Fours by Miranda July. If All Fours by Miranda July has no haters, I have ceased to live. It is the worst book I think I maybe have ever read. And I may be alone in this opinion because it was like a top 10 New York Times book from 2024. It got a lot of like acclaim and tons of people loved it, whatever. it had me so down bad that I was in the Goodreads section looking at the 1-star reviews to not feel insane. So if you are a 1-star reviewer of this book, I've I'm with you. We're right here together. This book is about, it is a kind of literary fiction book character study of this woman who is having like a midlife crisis type of thing. She decides to lie to her husband and go on a road trip to like find herself. And so she shacks up at a motel for weeks at a time that's only like 30, 40 minutes away from her family. She has a child. And I don't think that the premise of this book, by the way, is that she's a good person. I think we're kind of examining like her crash out. And women behaving badly is a genre of fiction that I have enjoyed in the past. What really ruined this book for me were two things. First of all, she's behaving so irrationally and so embarrassingly that I felt that I was getting hives. She basically like shows up in this town. She's planning to drive across the country, but something happens with her car, or maybe she stops for gas. Like, I don't quite remember. She catches eyes with a much younger man who works at the gas station. She has a torrid love affair with him. And then she like returns home as if nothing has happened. But for her, her internal world has completely changed. She can't stop thinking about this young gas station man who has no interest in her, none. And so like, this book is disgusting. If you are interested in like creepy, granular, body horror type of sensual scenes, check out All Fours by Miranda July, I guess. Couldn't be me, but I love that for you. It was, she like, I don't mind spoiling this book because I genuinely would not wish it on my worst enemy. She like she goes out expecting to meet up with this guy who again has no interest. And instead she ends up sleeping with his old girlfriend, who's also a much older woman than he is, and also a much older woman than our protagonist. And they are so gross together. Like, they're so creepy about this poor man. They are so, the like description of what they do together really skeeved me out, made my skin crawl. I should have stopped reading there. And then like she decides that she is going to learn, execute, record, and post a dance as like a siren song for this man. For this dance, it's like, I don't even know, it's like some sexy dance. For this dance, she wears granny panties and an enormous t-shirt, and she tucks, I don't know why she described this, she tucks her enormous t-shirt into the granny panties and pulls the excess out the legs. For some reason, this image has stayed with me for so long, and so I'm happy to impart it to you. I don't know what Miranda July was trying to do. I think maybe it was trying to be funny. Maybe it was trying to like examine female sexuality. That is not the sexuality of anybody that I know or have ever spoken to, and I hate to yuck somebody else's yum, but for me it was very yuck, and I like was mortified reading this book. It was physically painful, and I was also disgusted. So for the one person on Goodreads who wrote that maybe they said, if hating this book makes you a prude, there are worse things to be. And I really felt seen. So that is All Fours by Miranda July. I have seen it. It has like haunted me since I tried to read it. It has like shown up on the front tables of like every Barnes and Noble I've gone into. Every small bookstore is like, have you read All Fours by Miranda July? And I'm like, have I? I wish I hadn't. That is the #1 worst book that I read this year. And as of this moment, it's the worst book I've ever read. So 2025 gets that accolade of having contained the worst book I've ever read. And I hope that 2026 has no interest in competing. If that's the worst book I ever read, I don't think I got out of this vale of tears unscathed. So thank you so much for joining me on the hater train. I am happy to be back to talking about books that I love soon. There were so many this year actually that really stood out as like phenomenal reads. So I will be posting that later, but thank you so much. And I hope if you've read these, maybe you enjoyed them more than I did.